Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Before we actually get into the debate, I want you to understand that this was the copy of my own personal camera. I had to get a volunteer to work the camera for me. Actually, it was the vice president and general manager for Ave Maria Radio. His name is Michael Jones. He said that the camera, unfortunately, was cutting off on him during the debate. So there are some portions missing from the debate, unfortunately. However, he did assure me that he would send me a full copy of the program, and when I get it, I'll be able to then put up the entire copy. So what you're going to see here is portions of the debate, unfortunately, because, as he said, it was cutting off on him. So what's missing is the rebuttal period. I'm upset about that, but we'll get the full copy later. The rebuttal period is missing. You do have the opening statements, mine and Spencer's. Again, the rebuttal period seems to be missing. At least my rebuttal part is missing, it looks like. We do have the crossfire section, but not the entire crossfire section. Pretty much the large majority of the crossfire is missing. All right, so when you watch this video, please understand that this is the reason why the video is cut up like this, because of the technical difficulties with the camera.
To debate, our keynote topic is Islam a religion of peace? Shadid will begin with 15 minutes to argue in the affirmative. Shadid?
Greetings to you all. Muslims in the audience, assalamu alaikum. In the name of Allah, most beneficent, most merciful. We're here to discuss the topic, is Islam a religion of peace? What is the meaning of peace? According to the dictionary, the meaning of peace is a state of tranquility or quiet, freedom from civil disturbance, a state of security or order within a community provided for by law or custom, freedom from disquieting or oppressive thoughts or emotions, harmony in personal relations, a state or period of mutual concord between governments, a pact or agreement to end hostilities between those who have been at war or in a state of enmity. Keep these definitions in mind as I proceed to make my case to answer the question, is Islam a religion of peace? Now today we heard many things from many of the earlier speakers that I would say were outright incorrect about Islam. If, according to one of the earlier speakers, that Islam is the Boston bombing and 9/11 and Bali, can I then say that America is the Gulf War, the invasion of Panama, where 3,000 people, innocent Panamanian civilians were killed? Can I then say that this is representative of America? Can I say that America is the invasion of Grenada, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Korea, World War I and II, the Civil War, Jim Crow segregation? Can I say this is representative of America, that America is not a nation of peace because for almost just about every decade there's some type of war era, there's some war going on? If you would say no, then of course then you cannot try to categorize Islam by these incidents. Furthermore, we're here to talk about the question, is Islam a religion of peace? However, when we look at our own nation, and I'm all for defense spending, I believe every nation has a right to defend itself. But did you know that the United States alone counts for over 2/5 or just under half of the world's spending on military expenditures? No Arab country or no Middle Eastern country even comes close to that budget. Did you know that the United States alone has a military budget of $806 billion that we spend toward war expenditures and things of this nature? Did you know that if you compare the countries that are considered the axis of evil, which would be Iran, Iraq, Libya, Syria, North Korea, they have a combined military spending of only $15 billion. So we hear the question, about the threat of Islam, the internal threat, the outside threat. if they even had such an idea, they wouldn't have the money or the budget to even try to mount such a war against you. They would run out of money, and the United States would still have plenty of money to go forward in military expenditures. But we're here to talk about Islam, right? So, again, recall the definition that I gave of the meaning of peace. One of the meanings was a state of tranquility or quiet. Islam does indeed offer spiritual peace. For example, in the Quran, chapter 13, verse 28, it says, and also we heard this earlier, Al talked about the relationship in Islam that Allah, He has love, but, He's not your friend, and you can't have this personal type of relationship. Well, look what the Quran says. The Quran says, those who believe and whose hearts are set at rest or peace by the remembrance of Allah. Now, surely by Allah's remembrance are the hearts set at peace and rest. The Quran tells us in chapter 2, verse 45, seek help in patience and prayer. Truly, it is hard, save for the humble-minded. Seeking help in patience and prayer. When times are tough, like now, with our economy, Islam says, turn to God, and you will find rest in God, and God will help you in your struggles. The Quran says in chapter 76, verse 26, and a part of the night, prostrate yourself to Him, and glorify Him a long night, through prayer through the night. This is definitely speaking of a spiritual peace and gaining a closeness or relationship with God. But of course, I know most people are not interested in that. You want to know about the war and the violence, right? So let's get to it. What are Islamic teachings on peaceful relations with others? Now, before I get into it, so that all the things that I say are not thrown to the side and my speech is in vain, let me deal with a couple of issues. Number one, we heard Mr. Thomas speak about taqiyya, claiming that there is this so-called doctrine of deception that Muslims are allowed to lie if it helps Islam. I'll quote my opponent. He says, speaking in a video to Nabil Qureshi, he says, the doctrine of deception, or doctrine of deceiving unbelievers, making them think Islam teaches, or that Muslims in any particular situation believe something other than what they really believe. This is my opponent, Robert Spencer. The fact is, there is no such teaching. Islam does not teach that you can lie to promote Islam. I hope you hear this. That is a complete lie itself. Islam does not teach that you can lie to promote Islam. What is taqiyya? Matter of fact, although I don't have my, like the other also have my books outside, I'll do a small plug. I do have a video that I produced. You can get it on Amazon. It's called Taqiyya. What does it mean and how it has been used to, misused to demonize Muslims? You can find it on Amazon, all right? Unfortunately, I didn't bring the copies today. But just so you don't want to take my word for it, what does the teaching of Islam say? Literally, taqiyya means to safeguard or to defend yourself in fear. Okay? It is said that al-taqiyya with the tongue is with the tongue only. He who has been coerced into saying which angers Allah. In other words, taqiyya is a concept. When a Muslim's life is in immediate danger, let's say there's a persecution going on and there's some random killers hunting Muslims down. And so a guy comes to me and I say, oh, I take my hat off, put it away. We're killing Muslims. What are you? Are you a Muslim, Shadid? I'll kill you right now if you say yes. I say, no, I'm not a Muslim. So that way he doesn't kill me. It's not to promote Islam. In fact, if taqiyya has to be active, a person would not even mention Islam. But this is only when you're in immediate danger, and as it says, when one is coerced. Okay? And many of the scholars say this. Okay? For example, we have from Sunan al-Bahaqi, Ibn Abbas, says that, referring to one of the verses that supposedly mentions taqiyya, he says, anyone who after accepting faith in Allah utters unbelief, those who have been coerced, and as such uttered with their tongues that which their hearts did not confirm. This is what it is. It is not in a regular situation like right now. Nobody's threatening me. Nobody has said they're going to kill me if I don't say what Islam teaches. No, it is when your life is in immediate danger. Okay, I don't think everyone understands. If not, let me give you a better example. Everyone watched, may be familiar with Grey's Anatomy, right? The doctor show. There was an episode where there was a killer going through the hospital and he was killing people, but he was only killing surgeons. If you were a nurse or a pediatrician, he would leave you alone. So he goes into one of the rooms and there's two surgeons, one hiding under the bed, one in the closet. Maybe you've seen the episode. So he finds the one in the closet, and he says, "What are you?" The guy says, "I'm a surgeon." He said, "Please, but don't shoot me, don't shoot me." And he shot him. So he finds the other one under the bed. He drags her from under the bed, and he says, "What are you? Are you a surgeon?" She said, "No, I'm a nurse." He said, "Okay." And he walked away and let her go, and he kept on looking for surgeons. That would be an example of Takia, where her life was in danger, so she said, "Look, I'm not a surgeon," so he wouldn't kill her. It's not lying about Islam to cover up something. That would be such a foolish teaching. Anyone could just read and say, "Oh, you just lied to me, sir. Here's what it says in the Quran," or whatever. So no, there's no such teaching. Okay? And again, if I need to go further, I can give you more. Well, let's get to the next thing. The next thing that was mentioned earlier was the abrogation. They claim that all the peaceful verses have been abrogated. This is an incorrect position. Yes, there are some scholars who claim that, but these scholars are incorrect, and I can name you the scholars who tell them they're wrong. Number one, first of all, in order for there to be, and the verses to be abrogated, you need proof. You can't just say, "Oh, it's abrogated because I feel like it." There has to be proof for abrogation. Either Allah has to say that a particular, but don't give me something general that speaks of the idea of abrogation. No, in order to say a verse has been abrogated, you need direct proof. In other words, you need a statement that clearly says, this verse has been abrogated by this verse. And you will not find that concerning the verses that I'm going to mention, which we call the verses that demonstrate peace. Here's what some of the scholars say. In the book Science of Quran by Ahmed Ben Defman, he says that still others hold that there are no genuine reports available on the issue that go back to the Prophet. In other words, Muhammad, there's no statement from Muhammad, but he can say where you can quote that he says, yes, all the peaceful verses have been abrogated, or this verse has been abrogated by this other verse, canceling out the verses of peace. Okay? Some of the scholars, Imam Tabari.
5 minutes, Shadid.
Okay. Imam Tabari says that this idea that the opinion that the kindness was abrogated by later Quranic statements make no sense. So let's get to the heart of the matter. Okay? What about everyday peaceful relations with Muslims? With others. The Quran says in chapter 60, verse 8, that Allah does not forbid you being good or kind to those who have not fought you because of your religion or driven you from your homes, or from being just towards them. Allah loves those who are just. Quran chapter 5, verse 8. It says, "O you who believe, stand out firmly for Allah as witnesses to fair dealing, and let not the hatred of others towards you make you swerve to wrong and depart from justice. Be just," that is next to piety, "and fear Allah, for Allah is well acquainted with what you do." We heard the verse about the friends. Well, that's really not a good translation, because the word there is not friends. The word there actually is wali. The correct translation is, don't take them as your guardians or protectors. As Mustafa mentioned earlier, the Quran actually puts a condition. It says, it is against those who fight you that you should not take as friends. The Quran clarifies that. And this is actually the correct interpretation of the Quran. The scholars of the interpretation of the Quran say that the best interpretation of the Quran is to use the Quran to interpret itself. In other words, use other verses to interpret other verses. Regardless of what some outside, but regardless of the opinion of a scholar, the best translation of the Quran or interpretation is to use other verses of the Quran to interpret, and that's what Brother Mustafa did earlier. The Quran clarifies what it means by don't take as guardians protectors. It is referring to those who are being hostile towards you, who are trying to fight you. Okay? Are the Muslims commanded to make unending war on unbelievers? The Quran in chapter 2 verse 190 says, "And fight in the way of Allah against those who fight against you, but be not aggressive. Surely Allah loves not the aggressors." We have a hadith in Bukhari where the Prophet is said to say, "Do not wish to meet the enemy. However, if you do face the enemy, be patient." He's telling the believers, don't wish for fights, don't wish for war. And again, remember, these verses have not been abrogated. The Quran talks about fighting for a just cause. It says, "And why should you not fight in the cause of Allah, and for those who lack power and are being oppressed? Men, women, and children whose cry is, 'Our Lord, rescue us from this place whose people are oppressors, and raise for us from you one who will protect, and raise from us one who will help.'" The Quran also further clarifies, "To those against whom war is made, permission is given to fight." Everybody agrees with that, right? In the United States. If our country is attacked, don't we agree that we have the right to fight back and defend ourselves? Well, this is what the Quran says. These are the conditions in which Quran talks about fighting and war and things of this nature. I have more verses, but for the sake of time, let's go on to the next. Do you know that Islam permits peace treaties? Remember the definition of peace was what? Peace agreements between governments to end war or mutual agreement to end enmity. Well, the Quran agrees. Islam agrees with that. We have Ibn Jarir at-Tabari writes in his book of Jihad. He says Muslim jurists agreed unanimously that the Messenger of Allah made peace with the polytheists of the Quraysh. And by the way, peace does not mean that you are in subjection. Peace does not mean that you have to subject yourself to some humiliating concepts or that you have to pay the jizya. In fact, the scholars say that on the day of Hudaybiyah, that the Prophet concluded a peace treaty with the polytheists on the day of Hudaybiyah without them having to pay to him a tribute or a tax.
1 minute.
Okay? Thus, they say the Messenger of Allah did not find fault with peace agreements. So it's clear that Islam indeed is a religion of peace. Not passivity now. Not passivity, but peace. These are clearly peaceful injunctions. You must agree. Okay? So as I said, remember again that these peaceful verses have not been abrogated. I'm sure that's going to be brought up, but I can bring more and more scholars who clearly will make the case that the idea that the peaceful verses have been abrogated is the wrong opinion. Okay, and again, Muhammad never said it. Allah never said the peaceful verses are abrogated at all. Okay, so as I read to you, these are the verses that we see that clearly enjoin peaceful relations with non-Muslims. That there are clearly verses that when it speaks of fighting, it speaks of fighting in a just cause against oppression. When you've been attacked against wrong, people who are oppressing other people who are trying to oppress you. These are the reasons. And as we go on, I'll even bring you some more opinions from scholars that indeed make the case.
Thank you, Shadid. You can have a seat. And Robert, 15 minutes.
Thank you. I felt that since my appearance here today was so controversial, I decided not to show up. And I decided instead to base my remarks today entirely on the teachings and statements of various Islamic texts and Islamic scholars. And perhaps they're all wicked Islamophobes in disguise, I don't know, but in any case, it will be their words. In the first place, there is a problem. It all sounds so neat, and it all sounds so obvious when we hear these smooth presentations from Mr. Lewis and Mr. Akyol, and yet we know that there are Muslims who are committing acts of violence every day around the world and ascribing them to the teachings of the Quran and Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, and the various schools of Islamic law and the various sects of Islam. A few examples. The Taliban terrorist Baitullah Masood, he said, Allah on 480 occasions in the Holy Quran exhorts Muslims to wage jihad. We only fulfill God's orders. Only jihad can bring peace to the world. Now you might think, well, he means jihad like the internal spiritual struggle. And then you remember, this guy is the Taliban. They blow up girls' schools. They commit various atrocities against their own people as well as the American soldiers in Afghanistan and civilians of all creeds in Pakistan. We have the Times Square attempted car bomber, Faisal Shahzad, and he said, jihad, holy fighting in Allah's course with full force of numbers and weaponry is given the utmost importance in Islam. By jihad, Islam is established. By abandoning jihad, may Allah protect us from that, Islam is destroyed, and Muslims go into inferior position. Their honor is lost, their lands are stolen, their rule and authority vanish. Jihad is an obligation and duty in Islam on every Muslim. A Texas would-be terrorist, Khalid al-Basari, he said, after mastering the English language, learning how to build explosives, and continuous planning to target the infidel Americans, it's time for jihad. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, one of the 9/11 plotters, one of the masterminds of the 9/11 mass murders, he said, many thanks to God for his kind gesture and choosing us to perform the active jihad for his cause and to defend Islam and Muslims. Therefore, addressing the American people in general, he said, killing you and fighting you, destroying you and terrorizing you, responding back to your attacks, are all considered to be a great legitimate duty in our religion. Now, I could go on, but the question then becomes, how did these men come to misunderstand this peaceful religion so spectacularly? How did these men, many of whom and many others like them, dedicated their lives to studying the Quran, to studying the teachings of Muhammad and the rulings of the various schools of Islamic law? Where did they get the idea that Islam commanded warfare against unbelievers if it really doesn't? If it's just a matter of some benign comments about self-defense? The answer to that question takes us into the Quran itself. Now, there have been many Quran quotes that we heard from Mr. Thompson earlier, and many Quran quotes from Mr. Akyol and Mr. Lewis. And so I can gild the lily and quote a few more, and I will do as much as time permits. But I think that it's important that we not just take these things in an isolated way, but as we are constantly exhorted to do by Muslim spokesmen, to understand them in context. And so, for example, when you have this, fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden to which hath been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, even if they are of the people of the book. And remember, Mr. Akyol told us that was the honorific given to primarily Jews and Christians in the Quran. And so this Quran verse is saying to fight against even the people of the book until they pay the jizya, the special tax on non-Muslims, with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Now, that's the quote. How are we to understand it? Let's go to the Islamic scholars who talk about it. And then we come to, for example, Sayyid Abdullah Maududi. Maulana Maududi was a 20th century Pakistani politician and Islamic theologian. He wrote an extensive commentary on the Quran. He died in 1979. He's very mainstream. If you go to the local Islamic bookstore, and I'm sure there's one right around here, you will, I guarantee you, find extensive writings by Maududi available for sale, including perhaps this Quran itself, which was graciously given to me in the Finsbury Park Mosque in London when I visited a few years back. Finsbury Park Mosque was the home of Abu Hamza al-Masri, who was also quoted earlier by Mr. Thompson, who is now in prison for various jihad terror activities. But I went in, they didn't know who I was talking to the people, very nice people there, and they gave me quite a few books on Islam, including this Quran, and I said, didn't you have some trouble here a few years back? And he said, yes, but that's all done now we're all moderates. So this is the moderate Quran they gave me. And it's very helpful because it has commentary on the verses. So I just read the verse. Fight even the people of the book until they submit to your rule, which means in Islamic law a state of debasement and humiliation that denies basic rights to the Jews and Christians. Now, this is how Maududi explains the verse. He says, the purpose for which the Muslims are required to fight is not, as one might think, to compel the unbelievers into embracing Islam. Well, that's relief. They're not to fight in order to force non-Muslims to convert to Islam. Great. Except he doesn't stop there. Then he goes on to say this, rather, its purpose is to put an end to the suzerainty, the rule, of the unbelievers, so that the latter, the unbelievers, are unable to rule over people. The authority to rule, you'll notice that these are sweeping general statements, not the authority to rule in Muslim lands, or the authority to rule Pakistan, or the authority to rule the Palestinian territories, but the authority to rule all over the world. The authority to rule should only be vested in those who follow the true faith. Unbelievers who do not follow this true faith should live in a state of subordination. Anyone who becomes convinced of the truth of Islam may accept the faith of his or her own volition. The unbelievers are required to pay the jizya, the poll tax, in return for the security provided to them as the dhimmis, protected people of an Islamic state. The jizya symbolizes the submission of the unbelievers to the suzerainty, the rule of Islam. So in other words, one of the leading Islamic theologians of the 20th century says that the verse that I quoted means that Muslims must fight against non-Muslims in order to dislodge them from political power. He says that explicitly in his larger commentary on the same verse. He says, non-Muslims have no right to wield the reins of power in any part of God's earth, and if they do, it is the responsibility of the believers to dislodge them from that power by any means possible. Now you note that this is a debate based on not that the unbelievers have attacked the Muslims, but solely on the basis of the fact that they are unbelievers. That is the only criterion that is given for this call to warfare. Now, there's a great deal more that Mr. Lewis raised that I think as time permits, I will try to respond to all of it at this point so that we can be on the same page going into the next round. Certainly we're in total agreement when he says that people say Islam is the Boston bombing, Islam is 9/11, Islam is Bali bombing, etc., that we cannot characterize Islam by these incidents any more than we can characterize the United States by various alleged atrocities that the United States may have committed. Certainly I am in total agreement with that, because the actions of any particular believer or adherent or member of any group cannot necessarily be ascribed to the group or attributed to the nature of the group itself. You have to look at the teachings of the group in order to understand whether or not the actions of the believer coincide. And so that's what I'm doing now, looking at the actual teachings of the Quran and the actual ways in which Islamic scholars interpret those teachings so as to understand whether 9/11 and Boston and so on coincide with Islamic teaching or not. Now, he says, and so in that we're in total agreement. But then he says in the first place that Islam does not tell you that you can lie to promote Islam. Now here again, don't listen to me, let's go to Maududi. Maududi says, this is in the commentary on chapter 3, verse 28, which says, let not the believers take unbelievers as their awliya, and indeed that is the word wali, guardians or protectors, in preference to believers. Whoever does this has nothing to do with the law, unless you are doing it to guard yourselves against them. So in other words, there's some way that you can guard yourselves against the unbelievers, if you're a Muslim, by pretending to take them as your guardians and protectors. And so Maududi says this means that it is lawful for a believer, helpless in the grip of the enemies of Islam, and in imminent danger of severe wrong and persecution. So it seems that we're all in agreement here that this is something you only do in extreme cases. To keep his faith concealed and to behave in such manner as to create the impression that he is on the same side as his enemies. So you do that only in the case of severe wrong and persecution or in imminent danger. The question then becomes, what constitutes that? When people like Faisal Shahzad and various others, Ayatollah Maqsood and the others that I quoted earlier, and other jihadis are saying that the U.S. is at war with Islam, even though supposedly moderate Council on American Islamic Relations, a Hamas-linked Muslim Brotherhood front group here in the United States that masquerades as a civil rights organization, even they have said the U.S. is at war with Islam. If the U.S. is at war with Islam, that means that every Muslim is in danger in the U.S. This is something they would have us believe. And they would have us believe that when I speak the truth about Islamic teachings, that this somehow puts innocent people into danger. Well, that would trigger this dishonesty in that case, if it were necessary. And so, unfortunately, the extreme condition under which this kicks in is not all that extreme by the account of the Muslim authorities themselves, who say that this state of war exists, which Barack Obama, as we know, has repeatedly denied, and George Bush has repeatedly denied that we're at war with Islam. Nonetheless, these Muslim leaders insist that we are. Well then, they're all in danger. As far as abrogation goes, it's based on chapter 2, verse 106 of the Quran, which says that when Allah says, whenever we, he always refers to himself in the royal we, whenever we abrogate or cause to be forgotten a verse, we will replace it with one similar or superior. And so it is based on the Quran itself, which is the highest authority in Islam, that there is abrogation under some circumstances. Mr. Lewis quoted Ahmad von Denfer, a German convert to Islam, an expert in the interpretation of the Quran. quite rightly saying that there's no set agreement on which verses have been abrogated, which verses have not. There's quite a bit of disagreement. Some say no verses of the Quran have been abrogated at all. On the other hand, As-Suyuti, another Muslim scholar, says that 164 verses of peace were abrogated by the verse of the sword, chapter 9, verse 29, slay the unbelievers wherever you find them, and the chapter 9, verse 29 that I quoted earlier about fighting the Jews and Christians. There are stages there's a tradition in the interpretation of the Quran that goes all the way back to the 8th century, to Muhammad's first biographer, Ibn Ishaq. And Ibn Ishaq says that defensive jihad is indeed a stage of the teaching of the Quran, but it's not the only one. And he says that Allah first allowed Muslims to wage defensive warfare, but it was not Allah's last word on the circumstances in which Muslims should fight. Ibn Ishaq explains offensive jihad by invoking a Quranic verse. Then God, after explaining about the defense, says fight them until there will be no more seduction. That is, people will not be drawn away from Islam. Fight them until the religion is all for Allah. That's chapter 8, verse 39 of the Quran. In other words, the fighting continues until everyone is Muslim or subjugated under the rule of Islam as the Zimmis. So the same thing is taught by Ibn Qayyim, a medieval Muslim scholar. He says, for 13 years after the beginning of his messengership, Muhammad called people to God through preaching, without fighting or jizya. And I am his messenger, and when they do that, their lives and property will be safe. In other words, the lives and property of the unbelievers will not be safe until they confess that there's no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger, or submit and pay the jizya and are denied basic rights under the rule of the Muslims. And these things didn't arise in a vacuum. These things are not just the crazy misunderstandings of a group of violent people. When you have leading scholars like the Chief Justice of Saudi Arabia saying that, and one of the most influential Islamic scholars in the world, and there are many others whom I'll quote in a minute, who say that the third and final stage of Quranic development is offensive jihad, not just defensive. The verse that there's no compulsion in religion is completely irrelevant because, as I said right at the beginning, quoting Maududi, there is no compulsion in terms of the non-believers are not forced to accept Islam. They can live as the humiliated and subjugated dhimmis under the rule of Islam. Then they're not compelled to accept Islam, except that is the only way that they have to restore a decent life. Also, Mr. Lewis is making a great deal about peace treaties. So here again, don't listen to me. Let's go to Al-Azhar University in Cairo, which has been praised by the New York Times right after 9/11 as a beacon of Islamic moderation. And has been, Barack Obama spoke there on June 4th, 2009, and praised it as a haven of Islamic scholarship and learning. And it is indeed the most influential Islamic institution among Sunni Muslims around the world. And it's very ancient and very respected. Now, this is a book of Islamic law, Reliance of the Traveler, that these scholars of Al-Azhar have certified, says here, that it conforms to the practice and faith of the Orthodox Sunni community. And so you have some of the leading scholars in the Islamic world certifying this as being expressing the faith of Sunni Muslims, who are 85 to 90% of Muslims around the world. And it says this: jihad means to war against non-Muslims, and is etymologically derived from the word mujahada, signifying warfare to establish the religion. And then it goes on to give various Quran verses to justify that, including fighting is prescribed for you, chapter 2, verse 216, slay them wherever you find them, which they say is at 489, it's also at 2:191 and 95, and fight the idolaters utterly, 936. Now what about treaties? It says this, that that jihad is a communal obligation. It becomes personally obligatory for everyone when a Muslim land is attacked. The objective is to make war upon Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians until they become Muslim, or else pay the non-Muslim poll tax. And it says truces. Interests that justify making a truce are such things as Muslim weakness because of lack of numbers or materiel, or the hope of an enemy becoming Muslim. And then it refers to the incident in Muhammad's career that Mr. Lewis refers to. For the Prophet made a truce in the year Mecca was liberated with Safwan ibn Umayyah. He was the commander of the pagan force of the Quraysh. Muhammad was a member of the tribe of the Quraysh, but they had rejected his claim to be a prophet, and they fought a series of wars until Muhammad conquered them. Now, they made this treaty for 4 months in the hope that Safwan, the non-Muslim commander, would become Muslim. And he entered Islam before its time was up. If Muslims are weak, a truce may be made for 10 years if necessary. For the Prophet made a truce with Quraysh for that long. It is not permissible to stipulate longer than that. You know, I see these things on the news, people saying, oh, Hamas wants a truce for 10 years, isn't that wonderful? There will be peace in our time. And I think if you knew anything about Islamic law for making truces, you would know this is just something that they are using to gather strength to fight again more effectively later. And that is the peace that is offered. As far as abrogation goes, I'm not particularly wedded to the idea because I'm aware that there are many Muslim scholars who say that it's not so much that verses of the Quran are actually canceled, but that they simply are superseded in terms of condition, that various conditions prevail in which Muslims behave in one way or in another. And remember, there are 3 stages of jihad teaching according to the Quran, according to Muhammad's first biographer, Ibn Ishaq, scholars all through Islamic history, going up to the Chief Justice of Saudi Arabia in the 1960s, saying that there's first tolerance, then defensive warfare, and then offensive warfare. Many interpret the relationship of them this way, that when the Muslims are in a country, they are small in number and weak, and they face a much superior force, then they preach tolerance. Not so much tolerance for the unbelievers, tolerance for themselves. Then, when they grow in sufficient numbers as to start to threaten the established order and to work to establish Islamic law, then they can defend themselves against attacks. And finally, when they have the power to do so, then they can wage offensive warfare. That would not abrogate any of these statements. It's just a matter of different conditions. As far as the Battle of Tabuk goes, Mr. Lewis mentioned it as that the Romans were planning a surprise attack. Actually, in the Islamic text, the earliest Islamic texts about this battle, there's no mention of that whatsoever. The Romans didn't even know that the Muslims were there at that time. Muhammad made a completely gratuitous expedition to the Byzantine garrison in southern Syria or northern Arabia, depending on where you draw the border, of Tabuk, where the Byzantines actually left before he got there. If they had been itching for a fight, that's unlikely. They left before he got there, probably because they didn't know he was coming, and they just moved to a different place. But this was the occasion for the revelation of chapter 9 of the Quran, which contains those passages exhorting offensive warfare against Jews and Christians solely for the crime of being Jews and Christians. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Once again, we will have some time. We have 45 minutes right now for cross-examination and for questions and answers. Once again, you can fill out your cards. The shorter the question, the more likely it is that it will be answered. If you write on both sides of the card, you're probably not going to receive a response. So, and as Al prepares, Shadid, Robert, prepare your cross-examination questions.
What we'll do is we'll try to make it a minute to ask the question and 2 minutes to respond. How's that? Satisfactory? We'll won't be especially rigid about it, but I want to make sure we stay in bounds anyways. Shadid, you want to lead off with your cross-examination to Robert?
Let's see. You mentioned at a university. Are you aware of other scholars at the same university? For example, Sheikh Abdul Mansur, who explained the 3 stages of jihad, and he said that they were as such. He said defensive jihad is under condition of repelling aggression, whereas preemptive jihad is done only when the Muslim nation seriously expects a treason or an attack against its territories from its enemies. He says Islam prohibits attacking those who do not fight. Therefore, he says they are defensive, liberating war, and preemptive. And the preemptive is when the Muslims expect an attack. This is from Al-Azhar University as well.
Actually I am, and I'm very glad to see that. The problem with it is that aggression in many Islamic juridical contexts is often classified, I mean, I should say, rather, unbelief is classified as aggression, and that it itself constitutes an attack upon the Muslims, that the non-Muslims have the temerity to reject Muhammad and Islam. That is, here again, not a universal view, but the problem is that it is held. And as long as it is held, the question would then become, and I can use this time, actually, I can ask the question now myself, right? So how do you propose to eradicate the teachings from the scholars of Al-Azhar that I've outlined here? Many other scholars I haven't had time to quote, but I have them here, maybe we'll get time. In any case, how would you propose to fight against, within the Muslim community, the understandings of Islam that give rise to violence and terrorism?
Well, the answer is that these teachings are already there. And there are just as many scholars who hold the position that, for example, you mentioned the I have been ordered to fight hadith. What he didn't tell you, though, is that the majority opinion, this is from Imam al-Nawawi's book called the 40 Hadith, says that the majority of the Muslim jurists understand this hadith that it was only referring to the pagan Arabs. This is not, they don't understand this hadith as a command for Muslims to go out and attack everybody until they submit to Islam. The majority of the jurists understand that this hadith only was referring to the pagan Arabs. Others say that this hadith was actually abrogated by the many verses of the Quran, because they can't deny that there are over a dozen verses. I have them here with me. We have time, I'll get to them as well. That there are over a dozen verses where Muhammad and the Muslims are constantly being told that if they turn away, your job is only to deliver the message. If they reject you, your job is only to deliver the message. If they turn away, your job is only to deliver the message. So the scholars had to come to the conclusion, well then, if this hadith is accurate, then it has to be abrogated because the Quran is the top source in Islam. And that's the thing I want you to understand, everyone, that you can find all kinds of scholars, even in Christianity. I have stuff from Thomas Aquinas here, who talks about how the Jews are supposed to be put in perpetual servitude. I have decrees from papal bulls who give decrees that, you know, the Catholic rulers can just run over any infidels and heathens and put them in perpetual servitude. So you have those beliefs there as well. You see, the point is, what does the text of Islam say? The highest source of Quran, as I have mentioned, clearly outlines peaceful relations, no forcing. If they turn away, your job is only to deliver the message. So the way we combat that is by making sure people understand the correct Islamic position. Unfortunately, you'll never be able to get rid of these different perspectives. Even in Catholicism, these things are there.
Well, actually, no.
If we can direct people to these correct opinions.
Hold on.
Actually, there is no...
We will go to the question here of settling a doctrinal authority, because this has come up before. It came up this morning. We were unable to get to it, so it allows me to actually pick up on something that I was going to get to later anyways, and that is, isn't part of the problem here that Islam has no central interpretive authority? Consequently, Islam is more easily, or the Quran is more easily hijacked by people of ill will. And I'll let you begin with that, Robert.
Okay, well, there are a couple of things also that I think are important to respond to. Thomas Aquinas, as wise and as influential and important as he is not infallible or authoritative in terms of Catholic doctrine. And so to quote him in something that was never part of official church teaching is a bit disingenuous. There is no central authority in Islam, it's true, but there are the ulama, the religious scholars of various countries, and the institutions like Al-Azhar that have extraordinarily great influence. And so when you have these teachings being propagated at high levels, as they often are, like by authorities like the Chief Justice of Saudi Arabia and so on, then it's very difficult to go against them. You also have various schools of jurisprudence. In Sunni Islam, there are 4 schools of jurisprudence: Maliki, Hanafi, Hanbali, and Shafi'i, to which Muslims all generally, the Sunnis all generally belong to one or the other. And they all, I have the quotes here, teach jihad warfare in various ways as well. But I have to get in this because Mr. Lewis has twice referred to this passage of the Quran which says if they reject the message then turn away. He's not quoting this other one which says this, they but wish that you would reject faith as they do. So we're talking about people who reject faith and thus be on the same footing as they. So don't take allies from their ranks until they emigrate in the way of Allah. That is, until they leave their homes and join the Muslims. But if they turn renegade, that is, if they leave the faith, seize them and kill them wherever you find them. That's chapter 4, verse 89. And so there is a verse that says, if they reject you, turn away. And there's a verse that says, if they reject you, seize them and kill them wherever you find them. We could wish that all Muslims would only pay attention to the one and not the other. They're both in the most authoritative source of Islam. They both have many scholars backing up the teaching that is there. And this is the great difficulty. I'm not saying, never said from the beginning, that all Muslims believe these things or that all scholars say these things. But the reality of these teachings, backed up by scholars of great influence and power, means that violence in Islam has been a constant through its history and is a constant today, justified by the texts and teachings of Islam, which demonstrates the proposition before us today that it is not a religion of peace.
Shadid, let me throw the same question to you, and then feel free to piggyback on it in response to Robert. And that is, one of the complaints heard earlier today from people on the floor is that because there's no, in Catholicism, there's a quote, infallible teaching authority. Nothing quite like that in Islam. You do have respected centers of authority, but no universal teaching authority. Is that part of the problem? That the Quran, interpretation of the Quran can be hijacked by self-appointed, for instance, Osama bin Laden?
I would say, yeah, that's a problem because what's happening is the scholarship is being disrespected. These people, like Osama bin Laden's family, comes from a construction company family. He has no official, education in Islam degrees or anything like that. And so these people are appointing themselves. Basically, I was talking to someone earlier. It's like a gang leader who's appointing himself as the gang leader. And yeah, some people want to, follow him and listen to this person. But in actuality, this person has no authority, no official authority. Just people who want to listen and follow. So that's the problem, that the people are listening to these people and following them and not acknowledging the fact that, well, hold on, this person has no actual official authority or official education in Islam. And then to piggyback on Robert, he mentioned the verse 489, but what he didn't tell you, everyone, which he does a lot, is that the very next verse puts an exception. It says those who renegade, except if they leave and don't attempt to fight you.
Let me just stop you for a minute, only because I want to make sure people understand. 489 is kill them wherever they find them, right? Wherever you find them.
Well, it's more. It was talking about people who renegade or turn, turn
Set that up though, so that point, the point that you're making is put in the larger context.
Right. So in other words, he mentioned the part that says, oh, if they turn away, then kill them when you find them. But he's not telling you that the next verse gives the exception. It says that if they turn away, you kill them where they find, except those who have gone away and are not trying to fight you, or they go to a people with whom you've made a treaty. He's leaving that part out and just giving you the one part to make it seem like, oh, the verse if they turn away, kill them. But he's not telling you that the verse puts an exception, that if the person leaves, but they're not trying to fight the Muslim people, then leave them at peace, is what the verse says.